Good evening. This is a meeting of the Ealing Council Standards Committee. This is the annual meeting taking place this evening on Thursday, the 9th of March. My name's Paul Driscoll and I'll be chairing this meeting. And I'd like to welcome our independent members to the committee as well. So I've got Karen Quayle and Omu Sal. So welcome to the meeting as well. So I'm glad you could join us. I'll go through, we'll start with the agenda. I've had one substitution, which is Councillor Gallant has been substituted by Councillor Young. So welcome, Councillor Young. And Councillor Newstub is joining us online. I have not had any other notifications of apologies. And I've not known.
Sorry, Chair, I do have apologies from Councillor Sahota, who is unfortunately unwell, as she was last night for the full council meeting.
Right, thank you. Thank you. So if we can note the apologies there. I've had no notification of urgent matters, and I've had no notification of matters to be considered in private. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations. We've got the minutes of the previous meeting, which are the meetings of the 9th of June. These are very sparse. There were notes taken at the time, but the officer who was taking the notes at the time, and I know they were there because they were on my left, retired, and we can't trace the minutes. And while I can recall the meeting, I don't want to do minutes from my recollection. So our apologies that they're not here. They're, to say truncated is the first time we've come across this in multiple meetings that I've been at, so apologies for not having full minutes there. So do we have any matters or comments on the minutes such as they are? Right. And do we accept those minutes such as they are, which is very minimum? I take it as a yes. Thank you. And I've had no notification of dispensations either. So no dispensations are noted. And then we go into the main items on the agenda. So the first one is the overview of the Council's Freedom of Information performance. And I've got Lorraine Cox here who's going to give the outline of the paper. So Lorraine, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Driscoll. Good evening, everybody.
Can you just angle the mic just a little bit?
Is that better? Okay, thank you. I think it's fair to say that 2020 and 2021 were very challenging years in terms of freedom of information because we had the pandemic to deal with. So 2022 was about getting back on track and improving to where we were pre-pandemic. So I'm pleased to say that overall our compliance rate was about 80%, just under 80%, which was, I think, a really good achievement. And we had slightly less freedom of information requests last year, but they're so detailed that in terms of the hours that it takes officers to deal with, it's virtually the same, really. We didn't have any contentious things happening in the borough that would create a lot of FOI requests, which you tend to get, for example, the LTNs, or if you've got a big planning development that people aren't happy with, it tends to prompt lots of requests. So I think that's really good. And I have to say, I come here and present this, but it's on behalf of the organisation, and I couldn't be here with these statistics if it wasn't for the amazing support that I get from all the directors and the rest of the organisation. So I'd like to say that from me, really. In terms of compliance, I think if you look at 271, you can see that in the first half of the year, we were fairly good, but then the second half of the year, we've really picked up the pace and you know, seeing compliance rates of over 90% for some directorates is fantastic, and a really pleasing improvement for us. We have measures in place. We email directors, service heads saying, look, you've got this request outstanding, can you deal with it? And everyone's worked really hard to turn it around, and well, I'm pleased with it this year. That's it. Thank you. And just as an aside, for January, our compliance rate is 87%. So I'm really pleased with that as well.
Can I invite comments from the members of the committee? Any points that want to be raised? Councillor Dear.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, I think 2.4 and 2.6, I was going to ask the same question you have already answered, because it was if we see the tables of 2.4, the completion of information inquiries, it was fell in 2020, 21 and 22. That's what I wanted to ask you, whether it was a pandemic or it's a shortage of staff.
It was the pandemic, really, because obviously the organisation was diverting resources to supporting the council's response to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And also the ICO helpfully said that they understood that resources needed to be elsewhere during that time. So yeah, that's why it's low. But I think we're sailing into calmer waters now.
All right, thank
Yeah.
you. Same on 2.6, the inquiries fell drastically, and from 2019-22, I think it was the same reason of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, requests are becoming so more detailed about what they're actually asking within that one request. And with an FOI request, you have to answer it unless it's going to take over 18 hours. But 18 hours is quite a long time. It's 2.5 days work of an officer's time. So it's you know, a strain on the organisation, but we've turned it around. So yeah.
Do you have any data of irrelevant or nuisance inquiries?
I don't have any
I
data.
haven't seen in this report. Yeah.
I don't have any data, but what happens when we get an FOI request, we triage it within my team to make sure it is actually a valid request. So if it was something that wasn't a valid request, we would refuse it at that point. So these are actually genuine requests that have been looked at and said, yeah, that's a genuine request for information. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Any other comments? Councillor Shaw, then Councillor Blacker afterwards.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks for this detail, and I appreciate the difficulties that have gone on, and the direction of travel is now very much where we'd like to see it. Hopefully, you know, sort of at the meeting next year, we'll be seeing things returning back to normal. And just in response to Councillor Dear's question there, you mentioned that you reject, or it seems you reject a number of inquiries, which I know you can do for, you know, them not really being a valid request or fishing for information or something, and being too broad a net, if you like, to get any valid detail out. I was just wondering if there are any statistics. Obviously, we haven't got it for that. Do you keep those statistical records?
I don't actually, but we could do that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you thought, if you think it might be helpful just to show that, because I think that also shows the amount of requests that the officers and the team are dealing with as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even just taking one of those requests and then, you know, judging it, you know, that will take officers' time as well, just to do that before it gets rejected.
Yeah, we'll do that for next year. Yeah.
Councillor Blacker, did you have a comment?
Thanks. It was just on 3.4, the ICO complaints, and just whether there's any sense of what the outcomes of those are, because you know, how many of them were resolved satisfactorily? I suppose from the ICO's perspective and then the complainant's perspective.
Okay, we had a.
Could I just add in terms of what is the nature of the complaint as well? So what prompted a complaint to the ICO and the outcome as well? So just to answer.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes it's something simple that somebody hasn't had a response in time, but of course that's not going to happen now. so that the ICO will just say they haven't had a response. Can you send a response? But sometimes it's because the requester doesn't like our answer. And they've requested an internal review with us, and we've upheld that, and they've gone to the ICO. And I'm really pleased to say that last year, I don't think we had any that the ICO were against us. They supported us in our decisions. And a couple of them, I mean, a real random selection. I can't sort of pinpoint a specific area, but we did have a couple where they wanted details about employees, about their salaries and things. And we said, no, that's personal information. And they went to the ICO, and the ICO upheld that, which was pleasing. So, yeah.
Just on that point, because clearly if somebody's asking for personal information, that's beyond the scope of an FOI. So in terms of briefing inquirers about what their scope and remit, how is that sort of handled, or the advice and feedback that's given to inquirers?
Yeah, you can't tell a requester what they can ask for, but we do tell them on our website that it's for recorded information. But the FOI's got lots of exemptions, and one of them is for personal data. So we can say you've asked for this, but we're applying an exemption because it's personal data, and we're not providing that because it wouldn't be fair or lawful to do that, because employees don't expect their salary details unless they're senior members of staff. And we even had one where they wanted somebody's home address, which is totally inappropriate, you know, and the ICO agreed with us on that one. So yeah. And we can't ask them why they want the information either.
Thank you. We've had a range of questions. Any further points that would like to be raised? So Lorraine, thank you for your comments, and thank you for the officer's work, because I appreciate this has been quite an increasingly demanding scope. As we go on, people become more and more aware of the FOI requirements, and it does cut across multiple directories at the same time. So thank you for your officer's work. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this report is for noting. So I take that we've noted that report. Yes, agreed. Yep. Thank you very much. So thank you, Lorraine. Thank you for coming this evening. So the next report is the annual review of whistleblowing policy. And Helen's going to report on that here now.
Yes, I don't have very much to add to what's in the report. It's yeah, we haven't had any whistleblowing allegations, complaints this year. We normally only have sort of low single figures. This year, none. I did actually, when I saw the early draft of this, I did have a discussion with our Assistant Director of Audit and Investigations to sort of say, you know, should we be doing more to publicise whistleblowing policy? And he looked a bit sort of unimpressed by this, and that's when he reminded me that we normally only get a few, and you know, should we really be going out looking for more? I still do think myself that it's not a bad thing to remind, you know, maybe put something on the intranet or something on OneSpace to remind our officers that this facility is available. I like to think that we haven't had any whistleblowers, not because there aren't any problems, but because officers and partners feel able to raise issues through established channels, which is I mean, if I have a problem, for example, you know, I would go and speak to the relevant manager, director, or escalate it, and that's what I hope is the story behind these figures.
Any comments, questions? Yeah, because it could lull us into a false insecurity having no reports, but I think the step to say that, to make sure that officers and those engaging with the council are aware of that policy, that it does exist. There is a process that should be acted upon. And I think that's entirely reasonable to make sure that that's still seen as promoted and publicised. So, and there are standard channels of communicating with staff. So there needs to be some inserts into that at some point. So that can be undertaken. Yeah. Any other comments? Anything else? So I think the recommendations is for to go through with the publicising of the policy and authorises Director of Legal and Democratic Services to follow consultations with the Assistant Director of Audit and Investigation to look at how we're going to publicise the policy. So if there's no further questions, are we all in agreement? That, yeah, accepted. Thank you very much. And then the last substantive item is the annual review of the operation of the council standards regime. So I'll pass over to Helen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a meatier item than the previous item because we have had some complaints. When I was 3.7 shows the on page 20 of the pack, page 2 of the report shows the year-on-year trends. I did, when I was doing this, I thought, should I be knocking off the sort of older years? I thought, no, actually it does show patterns. And particularly Whisper It, the sort of 2021, 21, 22, the LTN years, a real spike, as Lorraine will nod knowingly. Thank goodness standards complaints didn't hit the heights of FOI because there's significantly a significant amount of work and basically I do all the work or nearly all the work on these complaints, whereas FOI it's spread a little wider across the organisation. I have tried to look at the complaints and draw some trends, and I set those out in point 4.6. I have, and obviously trends, we have to take this with a bit of a pinch of salt, because when you're looking at trends against a total number of complaints in single figures, it's trends is maybe an exaggeration, but I have certainly observed that members of the public particularly are seeking to use the standard regime as a tool to challenge council policies and decisions more generally. So where particularly members that I had one complaint against all the members of cabinet in relation to a particular policy. And basically the complainant didn't like the policy decision that cabinet had made, and that's their entitlement, that's their right, but standards committee isn't the appropriate place to sort of pursue a policy objection. So the last 2 or 3 years, where I guess LTNs is probably the peak of using the standards regime to voice complaints about policy, but it's certainly we've had 1 or 2 every year for the last few years. Failure or delay by councillors to respond to correspondence or calls. Again, this is something that we have 1 or 2 every year. And often as not, when I look into it, it actually turns out that the councillor has acknowledged
but then there's, they don't get the feedback from the officer team. So, nothing more happens. And of course, the complainant or the original inquirer thinks that the councillor is doing nothing. But I can see some councillors nodding sagely, but actually they have made an inquiry, but there isn't nothing much is happening on the other end. And then the final line of your potential trend, and I have had several of these actually this year, and most of them actually don't appear in the statistics at all, because I knock them out before I, refusing to register them. But this is where I receive complaints about a councillor in relation to their private life or their employment elsewhere, and someone who has fallen out with them privately or doesn't like what they're doing in their non-council employment, and complains to me about it. And it's, it's not, the law is very clear that standards regime is relates only to performance, councillors' work and actions in, when working as a councillor. So most of those, as I said, they don't appear in these statistics at all. There is one this year which I have included because I did do a formal decision, and that was because it came from an anonymous email account, which basically did, I got a bounce back when I tried to email them. So I felt I needed to record the decision somewhere. So I did go through the motions and did formally record that, I had considered it and it would not be referred. But in most cases, I simply deal with it with an email back to the complainant. So, yes, Chair, and I'll leave it there, I think, and I'm sure there'll be questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Any comments? No.
Sorry, Chair, I realise there was one important point I wanted to make, and that is hardworking independent people who I wanted to thank, because for every one of these decisions, I always I send a copy through to Omu and to Karen, who always diligently respond. So when you see the delays in dealing with it, they are not down to the independent people, they're down to me. I get the response and then have to digest the whole thing, and it does take quite a bit of time in most cases.
And can I ask, when the feedback goes to the complainee about their complaint didn't proceed, do they get told, well, we have reviewed it by independent parties as well, just so that they know it's not, I suppose, within the bubble of the council, there is another eye looking at and reviewing, because that's kind of reassuring to somebody? Yes,
my standard decision template does say independent people consulted. Right. Yes, and both. What I don't say on there is what the independent people say, because there are times when independent people feel one way, and for good reasons I make a decision the other way. And to put it bluntly, I don't particularly want to enter into a dialogue with the complainants about why there is a difference. But I do. It does say that they were consulted.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So first of all, I'd just like to thank Miss Harris for her work on this, because I know that the complaints do sort of land with her and do take up, the investigation can take up a lot of the time. Whether or not it's the best use of time, perhaps I'll leave that with her to judge. But there we are. And also to thank the independent members for looking. I think it's very important, the role that they have within this, that it sort of removes it from the party political arena, that they can look and judge, you know, as independent people on whether or not they think that the behaviour is acceptable or not. So I think that's an important role to play. And also just to sort of comment that in my role as the chief whip of the majority group, obviously the large bulk of councillors at the moment and for the next 3 years fall into the Labour group, and that just really to put on the record, there is of course a difference that with these complaints, I do get notified of them when they're a Labour member, just as Gary, who is my opposite member for the Liberal Democrats, will get notified them if it was a Liberal Democrat member. And that, you know, the parties do have their own rules and own standards as well. So as well as being looked at by the independent people, then, you know, I do look at each of these complaints and look and judge whether or not there's something for me to investigate using the party's systems as well. So, you know, there are sort of two operating systems, if you like, within the complaints procedures that can then be triggered by a complaint.
Thank you for those comments. Just one thing, a comment I'd make is about, do you think the speed up responding and investigating complaints, once they go to approve to be investigated, do you think that's always as swift as it could be? I can understand it can be cumbersome, but I think people get frustrated about that duration, that time lag.
Yeah, there are two clear stages. The first is my filter, this is my initial decision on whether or not the test has been met to refer for investigation. That's entirely me. I don't, you know, the procedure just says, you know, I don't do a full investigation, but at the same time, common sense suggests that particularly where it's a relatively straightforward matter, if I can find out more background fairly quickly and easily, then it makes sense to do that, and not, particularly if it's by doing so, you know, it can becomes very clear that there is no breach, then I will do that. And there is a very direct correlation between how potentially challenging a complaint is and how long it takes me to work it through, because it actually takes quite a long time to, you know, I take this very seriously, and I think I have a responsibility to do it very, very carefully, almost especially if I'm deciding not to refer, because, you know, I need to work it through and get my rationale clear. So, you know, it is robust in the face of challenge, and some longer standing members will recall that the Ealing Council standard regime has made the law courts before now. We were the leading standards case for a few years. It's about, you know, it's a good 10 years old now. So other cases have happened since. It's in the public domain. So also former Councillor Dennehy, who didn't approve of the decision. Yeah, so I am, and we are very aware of the importance of getting it right, preferably to the point that people can clearly see it's right and fully reasoned, so they don't even think about challenging. But if they do, that it will be robust in the face of challenge. In relation to referrals for investigation, happily we don't have many of those, but when we do, delay is a real problem. In fact, we had one last year, and that was the subject of the meeting that for which the minutes are lost in cyberspace somewhere. It is a problem because I need to refer it to one of my lawyers, and try and spread it around and offer development opportunities to different people, but they all have, I'm running out of candidates for that, I have to say. Most of them been there and done that. But they're doing it on top of an existing very full caseload. And so delay, it is a challenge So, you know, I'll own that, and it's another reason, it's another incentive, you know, because of the cost and expense, because this is not free resource. This is resource that the council pays for, and a legal services team that is no bigger than it has to be. And, you know, every pound we spend on legal services is a pound not available, money not available to spend on other frontline services. So it's important that, you know, we, as a standards committee, you know, work to train, you know, maintain standards and keep the number of complaints low, and the number of meritorious complaints even lower, so that, you know, we don't have to, you know, divert resource from elsewhere. But yes, delay is a problem, Chair.
Are there any further comments? Just checking. This report is for noting. So are we in agreement with noting the report? There we go. Oh, Councillor Shaw.
Yes, I'm happy to note the report, Chair. Just one, it has literally just caught my eye that's in the report in paragraph 4.4. There is just a typo where it refers to low traffic neighbourhoods, which, although that could be perhaps how many residents saw them, you know, perhaps there's a Freudian slip within this, but you know, if we could just correct that for the
Correction
record,
noted.
yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
At home, I noticed it. Then I confused myself, is it a law or low? Then I was going to ask Helen, then I thought it's better not to. Thanks, you have raised that point. Thanks.
Thank you. I did read the report, and of course I was reading what I was expecting to read. So thank you. And if we do have any law traffic, then we will duly note it. So thank you. On that note, we accept the report and it's noted. And that would then conclude the business. The date for the next meeting. So that will be noted in the meeting schedule, which will be published at the start of the civic year. So can I thank everybody for attending? Oh, there is 18th. Yeah, only if required. Yeah, we have a committee for the 18th in the diary if required there. So, Ms. Sal, so.
Yes, Chair, if you allow me, may I draw your attention on the document titled "The Minutes of the Previous Meeting." It's in the public document pack, minutes of the meeting of the Standard Committee held on the 9th of June, 2022. If you go to page 2, I don't know if the minute lasted only 10 minutes, because it says meeting commenced 7 p.m. and finished 7:10 p.m.
Which it lasted more for the 9th of June.
Yeah, on page 2.
Yes,
At
sure.
the bottom.
I wonder if it's been cut off on my iPad. All right. Oh, yes, it did.
It did last 10 minutes.
It lasted longer than 10 minutes. It definitely did. It genuinely did. I wouldn't like to say how long.
No,
It definitely was more than 10.
Definitely.
I can vouch for that.
So
Chair.
I would draw your attention on that. And the date says also today's date. Is that correct?
Will be the date it's signed.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, then.
But I can't make up the time it lasted, but it was more than 10 minutes. That is, so
Usually,
I can just correct that here and now. So I'll just strike that out because.
yeah.
So one of the Democratic Services officers, Richard Blum's going to come in, I think.
Hi, Chair. Sorry about that. Yes, I was just thinking, simply because the public section of that meeting probably only lasted a few minutes, simply because that was just the procedurals.
Right.
Whereas the private section would have certainly lasted more than that amount of time. So I'm wondering whether that would be material.
That makes sense. It's a reference to the public
Correct.
duration, and that's a record of the public duration rather than the private session, which went on for some time.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's a rational explanation. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I remember from that meeting, we were dealing with the council complaint. So after about 10 minutes, then we went offline and then we discussed it privately.
I think that's a rational explanation of how it proceeded. Yes, so thank you, everybody, for a collective agreement there. That makes sense now. So with that in mind, with that explanation in mind, I think that's fine. And that would conclude our meeting. We have the meeting in April, I think the 19th, if required. So other than that, there will be a full schedule with the civic calendar that will be published later in sort of May time, I think. So thank you for everybody for attending, and thank you for your contributions.